"Stop the exercise." The young recruit's voice cut across the training field, but the only response she got was laughter. The sun had barely climbed above the pine trees surrounding Naval Training Center Blackwater. A thin layer of morning fog still lingered over the obstacle course as dozens of recruits gathered beneath the towering rappel structure that dominated the center of the field. The steel tower stood nearly 60 feet tall, its cables stretching across the training area like giant spiderwebs. For most of the recruits, it was just another challenge waiting to be conquered. For recruit Emily Carter, it was suddenly something else entirely. The sound had been almost impossible to notice. A tiny metallic snap. Brief. Sharp. Gone in less than a second. But Emily had heard it. While everyone else continued talking, adjusting equipment, or joking with their friends, she had turned immediately toward the tower. Something about the noise felt wrong. She couldn't explain why. She couldn't point to a specific problem. She only knew that every instinct told her to pay attention. Around her, recruits prepared for the day's training event. Some stretched. Others tightened gloves or checked harnesses. The atmosphere carried the familiar mix of nervous energy and excitement that came before every major exercise. Most of them were focused on proving themselves. Emily found herself focused on the tower. Her blue eyes followed the network of cables and anchor points near the upper platform. From where she stood, everything looked normal. The structure appeared solid. The equipment had passed inspection earlier that morning. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the uneasy feeling remained. "You okay, Carter?" asked recruit Jake Wilson as he stepped beside her. Emily hesitated. "Did you hear that?" Jake looked confused. "Hear what?" "A snapping sound." Jake glanced toward the tower and shrugged. "It's steel and cables. Stuff makes noise." A few nearby recruits overheard the conversation. One of them laughed. Another shook his head. Emily turned back toward the structure. The fog shifted slightly in the breeze. For a brief moment, sunlight reflected off one of the upper anchor points. She narrowed her eyes. Something looked different. Not broken, not damaged, just unusual. "I think somebody should take another look at the tower," she said quietly. That comment immediately attracted attention. Several recruits exchanged amused looks. Tyler Brooks let out a chuckle loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. 3 weeks in training, and suddenly she's an engineer. More laughter followed. Emily felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to cause problems. She simply couldn't ignore what she had noticed. "I'm serious," she said. "Something doesn't feel right." "Feel?" Tyler repeated. "That's your evidence?" The group laughed again. Even some recruits who barely knew Emily joined in. Nobody seemed interested in the possibility that she might be right. They only saw a nervous recruit creating concerns before an important exercise. Emily lowered her gaze for a moment. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was overthinking it. Training was stressful. Lack of sleep affected judgment. The instructors reminded them of that constantly. Yet when she looked back toward the tower, the feeling returned stronger than before. The steel structure stood silently against the brightening sky. Everything appeared normal. Everything appeared safe. And somehow, that only made Emily more uncomfortable. The instructors began organizing the recruits into groups while the morning fog slowly burned away under the rising Virginia sun. Orders echoed across the training field. Harnesses were distributed. Helmets were checked. The steady rhythm of preparation seemed to reassure everyone except Emily Carter. She remained near the edge of the formation, her attention drifting back to the tower every few seconds. The more she looked at it, the less comfortable she felt. She could not explain why. She only knew that the uneasy feeling refused to go away. Recruits around her continued joking as they adjusted equipment. Tyler Brooks was still enjoying the attention he had earned from mocking her concern. Every time someone glanced toward Emily, he found another reason to make a comment. "Maybe Carter has super hearing," he said loudly. "Maybe the tower whispered its secrets to her." Several recruits laughed again. Even Jake Wilson, who had been more neutral earlier, struggled not to smile. Emily pretended not to hear them. She focused on checking her own harness. The nylon straps felt secure. The buckles were properly fastened. Everything about the equipment in her hands appeared normal. Yet every time she looked up, her eyes returned to the same section near the upper platform. A few minutes later, an assistant instructor walked down the line conducting final checks. Staff Sergeant Nolan Reed had spent nearly 20 years training military personnel. His reputation was built on efficiency, discipline, and very little patience for unnecessary interruptions. When he reached Emily, she hesitated only briefly. "Staff Sergeant, may I report a concern?" Reed glanced at her. "Make it quick." Emily pointed toward the tower. "I think one of the upper anchor points should be inspected again." Reed followed her gaze for a moment before shaking his head. "The structure was inspected this morning." "Yes, Staff Sergeant, but I heard a sound and I think—" "You think?" Reed interrupted. "Recruit Carter, this facility has been operating longer than you have been alive." A few recruits nearby exchanged amused looks. Emily felt every eye turning toward her. Reed adjusted a clipboard under his arm. If there was a problem, the inspection team would have found it. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "Good. Focus on your training." The conversation ended there. Reed moved on without another word. Tyler waited only a few seconds before speaking. That worked out well. More laughter followed. Emily looked down at the grass beneath her boots. For the first time, doubt started creeping into her mind. Maybe she had imagined the sound. Maybe stress was affecting her judgment. The training program demanded constant focus, limited sleep, and relentless physical challenges. Mistakes happened. People misread situations all the time. Yet as the groups began moving toward the tower, something caught her attention again. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice. One of the upper support cables seemed to vibrate slightly in the breeze, while the others remained almost perfectly still. Emily narrowed her eyes. The difference lasted only a moment before disappearing. She swallowed hard. Her concern returned immediately, stronger than before. Around her, nobody noticed. Recruits chatted about upcoming exercises. Some were excited. Others were nervous. Everyone seemed focused on proving themselves. Emily felt completely alone with what she was seeing. As the first group approached the base of the tower, she looked up once more. The steel framework stood motionless against the bright morning sky. To everyone else, it looked exactly as it should. To Emily, it felt like a question nobody was willing to ask. The first group gathered at the base of the tower while instructors moved with practiced efficiency from station to station. Harness checks continued. Safety commands echoed across the field. The exercise was beginning exactly as scheduled, and that fact alone seemed to reassure everyone except Emily Carter. She remained near the back of her formation, watching the upper sections of the structure with growing concern. Every logical part of her mind told her to let it go. The tower had been inspected. An experienced instructor had dismissed her concern. No visible damage could be seen from the ground. Yet something inside her refused to move on. Emily had always been observant. Growing up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, she had developed a habit of noticing details other people ignored. Her father used to call it overthinking. Her mother called it paying attention. Throughout school, it had often placed her in awkward situations. She was the student who noticed errors on assignments, the employee who spotted mistakes in inventory reports, the teammate who questioned things everyone else accepted. Most of the time she stayed quiet because experience had taught her that people rarely appreciated being corrected. Standing on the training field, she wished she could silence the same instinct now. Instead, she continued watching. The first recruits started moving toward the climbing section of the course. Excitement spread through the group. For many of them, this was one of the most anticipated challenges since arriving at Blackwater. Tyler Brooks seemed especially eager. He had spent most of the morning talking about how quickly he intended to complete the course. "Watch and learn," he announced to anyone willing to listen. "This is what confidence looks like." Jake Wilson laughed. "Just try not to embarrass yourself." Tyler grinned. "That only happens to people who think towers are haunted." Several recruits glanced toward Emily before laughing again. She said nothing. Arguing would accomplish nothing. She tightened the strap on her helmet and looked back toward the upper platform. The breeze had picked up slightly. Sunlight reflected off the steel framework. Once again, her attention locked onto the same section she had been studying all morning. Then she noticed something new. One of the metal brackets near the anchor assembly appeared slightly misaligned. The difference was tiny. Most people would never notice it. Even Emily could not be certain from her position. She stepped a few feet to the side, hoping for a better angle. The bracket disappeared behind another support beam. She moved again. This time she caught another brief glimpse. Her pulse quickened. It was still there. Not obvious. Not dramatic. Just enough to make her uneasy. "You are doing it again." The voice came from beside her. Emily turned and saw Megan Foster adjusting her gloves. Unlike Tyler, Megan did not sound mocking. She sounded curious. Doing what? Emily asked. Looking at that tower like it owes you money. Emily managed a faint smile. Maybe I am just nervous. Megan followed her gaze toward the structure. Everybody is nervous. Not like this. Megan studied her for a moment before shrugging. You know, if something was really wrong, somebody else would have noticed. Emily wanted to believe that. She truly did. Yet as she looked back toward the upper platform, the uneasy feeling settled deeper than ever. Around her, dozens of people focused on the challenge ahead. Only Emily remained focused on a question she could not answer. The line of recruits slowly advanced toward the tower as instructors called out names and assigned positions. The morning had settled into a routine rhythm that seemed perfectly normal to everyone except Emily Carter. The more time passed, the less confident she felt about speaking up again. Yet the feeling that something was wrong refused to disappear. She watched the structure carefully while trying to convince herself that she was imagining things. Every minute that passed made that argument harder to believe. A whistle sounded from across the field. The first climbing group was preparing to begin. Recruits adjusted helmets and exchanged nervous smiles. Some stretched their shoulders. Others bounced lightly on their feet. The anticipation was obvious. This was one of the milestones everyone had talked about since arriving at Blackwater. Emily barely noticed any of it. Her eyes remained fixed on the upper section of the tower. Then she saw it again. A brief movement. Tiny. Almost invisible. The same bracket near the anchor assembly appeared to shift slightly before becoming still once more. Emily blinked. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe it was the angle. She stepped several feet to the side. The bracket disappeared behind a support beam. She moved again and caught another glimpse. Her stomach tightened. This time she knew she could not ignore it. Before she could talk herself out of it, Emily left her position and headed toward Staff Sergeant Nolan Reed. He stood near a supply table reviewing paperwork while assistant instructors coordinated the exercise. Reed looked up as she approached. His expression immediately hardened. Recruit Carter. Emily came to attention. Staff Sergeant, I need to report a concern. Reed sighed heavily. Again. Several nearby recruits turned to listen. Emily felt their attention immediately. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Did the tower make another mysterious sound? A few recruits laughed quietly. Emily ignored them. No, Staff Sergeant. I believe there may be an issue with one of the upper anchor brackets. Reed stared at her for several seconds. Based on what? Emily hesitated. She knew how weak her answer would sound. Observation, Staff Sergeant. Reed folded his arms. Observation. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Do you have engineering credentials that nobody told me about? More laughter followed. Emily felt heat rising into her face, but remained composed. No, Staff Sergeant. Reed shook his head. The tower has already passed inspection. I understand that. Then return to your position. Emily opened her mouth to speak again, but stopped herself. Reed was already turning away. The conversation was over. Around her, the laughter grew louder than before. Tyler Brooks grinned, as if he had just witnessed the funniest moment of the morning. Maybe next she will inspect the clouds. Even Jake Wilson laughed at that one. Emily returned to her place in line without saying a word. Embarrassment settled heavily across her shoulders. She had done everything she could. She had reported her concern twice. She had followed procedure. Nobody wanted to hear it. For a brief moment, she considered letting it go. Then her eyes drifted back toward the tower. The uneasy feeling returned immediately, stronger than ever. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice continued repeating the same message. Pay attention. Something is not right. And no matter how much everyone laughed, Emily could not make that voice disappear. The exercise moved forward despite Emily Carter's growing concern. The first climbing team assembled at the base of the tower while assistant instructors reviewed procedures one final time. The atmosphere had shifted from casual conversation to focused anticipation. Recruits who had spent weeks preparing for this moment now stood ready to prove themselves. Emily should have been focused on the same thing. Instead, she could not stop watching the upper structure. Every instinct continued pulling her attention back toward the same area. She told herself to let it go. She reminded herself that trained professionals had already dismissed her concerns. None of it helped. The uneasy feeling remained. Nearby, Tyler Brooks seemed determined to keep the morning's joke alive. Every few minutes, he found a new audience for another comment. Maybe Carter should inspect the parking lot next, he said. There might be suspicious pavement. A few recruits laughed. Others shook their heads. Some simply avoided looking at Emily altogether. Nobody wanted to be associated with the recruit who kept questioning the instructors. Emily remained silent. She had no interest in defending herself. The more attention the situation received, the more isolated she felt. Even Megan Foster seemed uncertain now. Earlier, she had shown curiosity. Now she appeared reluctant to get involved. That hurt more than Emily expected. The whistle sounded again. The first group stepped closer to the tower. Assistant instructors moved into position. Safety checks continued exactly according to procedure. Everything looked organized, professional, controlled. Emily knew she should feel reassured. Instead, her pulse continued to climb. Then she saw it. For the briefest moment, sunlight struck the upper anchor assembly from a different angle. A narrow gap appeared near the bracket she had been watching all morning. Tiny, almost invisible, yet unmistakable. Emily froze. The gap vanished as quickly as it had appeared, but she knew what she had seen. This was no longer a vague feeling. It was no longer just intuition. Something up there was not aligned correctly. Before she could stop herself, she stepped out of formation again. Several recruits immediately noticed. Tyler laughed before she had even spoken. There she goes. Emily ignored him and headed directly toward Staff Sergeant Nolan Reed. This time she did not hesitate. Staff Sergeant, please. Reed turned sharply. His patience had clearly run out. Recruit Carter, what now? Every nearby conversation stopped. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Emily felt the weight of their attention. I am requesting that the upper anchor assembly be checked one more time. Silence followed. Reed stared at her in disbelief. You are requesting? Yes, Staff Sergeant. Reed took a slow breath. Do you understand how many personnel inspected that tower this morning? Yes, Staff Sergeant. Do you understand how many years of experience those inspectors have? Yes, Staff Sergeant. Reed shook his head. Then explain why you think your opinion should outweigh theirs. Emily opened her mouth, searching for an answer that would make sense. Nothing sounded strong enough. Because something is wrong, she said quietly. A few recruits laughed immediately. Others exchanged uncomfortable looks. Reed's expression hardened. Return to your position immediately. His voice carried across the field. The laughter grew louder. Tyler was nearly grinning from ear to ear. For Emily, it was the most humiliating moment of the morning. Yet even as she walked back toward the formation, she could not shake the same thought that had followed her since sunrise. Everyone believed she was wrong. And somehow, she was more certain than ever that she was right. Emily returned to her position and stared at the grass beneath her boots. Around her, the morning continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Instructors moved between stations. Recruits adjusted equipment. Conversations resumed. Laughter slowly faded. Yet the feeling of embarrassment lingered. For a few moments, Emily wished she had never said anything. She had followed her instincts 3 separate times, and each attempt had only made her look more foolish. Most of the recruits now viewed her as a distraction rather than a teammate. Even so, she could not force herself to stop watching the tower. The first climbing group received final instructions. Names were called. Positions were assigned. Everything appeared routine. Emily lifted her eyes toward the upper platform once again. The bracket remained partially hidden behind a support beam. The sunlight had shifted enough that she could no longer see the tiny gap she had noticed earlier. She began wondering whether she had imagined it after all. Then a new voice echoed across the field. Why is training not started yet? The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped. Assistant instructors straightened. Recruits turned toward the access road bordering the training area. A dark utility vehicle had just pulled to a stop nearby. The man stepping out was impossible to ignore. Chief Instructor Robert Hayes carried himself with the calm authority of someone who had spent decades earning respect. He was not physically imposing in an obvious way. There was no need. His reputation arrived before he did. Every recruit at Blackwater knew his name. Every instructor answered to him. Hayes surveyed the field with a single glance. Report. Staff Sergeant Reed immediately approached. Minor delay, Chief. We are ready to proceed. Hayes nodded. His attention moved across the formation. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then his eyes settled on Emily. She was standing perfectly still, but something about her expression caught his attention. While everyone else focused on the exercise ahead, Emily was looking somewhere else entirely. She was looking at the tower. Hayes followed her line of sight. Recruit. Emily blinked in surprise. Sir. Step forward. Dozens of recruits turned toward her. Tyler Brooks looked delighted by the sudden attention. Emily stepped out of formation. Hayes studied her face carefully. You are the recruit who delayed training? Staff Sergeant Reed answered before she could speak. Chief, she has been raising concerns about the tower despite multiple inspections. A few recruits smiled. They expected the conversation to end exactly as the others had. Hayes did not smile. Is that correct? Emily swallowed. Yes, sir. Why? The field became silent. Emily glanced toward the structure one more time. Because something feels wrong, sir. Several recruits exchanged amused looks. Hayes remained expressionless. That is not a technical explanation. No, sir. Then give me the best explanation you have. Emily took a breath. I heard a metallic snap earlier this morning. Later I noticed unusual movement near one of the upper anchor brackets. I cannot prove it. I only know I have not been able to ignore it. Hayes said nothing for several seconds. Unlike everyone else, he did not appear annoyed. He did not appear amused. He simply watched her. Then he looked toward the tower again. Show me exactly where. For the first time that morning, someone was not laughing. Every eye on the training field followed Chief Instructor Robert Hayes as he walked toward the base of the tower. The laughter that had surrounded Emily Carter all morning vanished almost instantly. Nobody wanted to be caught smiling now. Hayes carried no visible urgency. That was what made the moment feel so different. He moved with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years making important decisions under pressure. Emily stepped beside him and pointed toward the upper section of the structure. There, sir. Hayes narrowed his eyes. From the ground, the bracket looked perfectly ordinary. Steel beams crossed in front of it. Shadows shifted across the framework as clouds drifted overhead. Several recruits exchanged knowing looks. To them, the entire situation still seemed ridiculous. Staff Sergeant Reed stood nearby with his arms folded, clearly expecting the inspection to confirm what everyone already believed. Hayes remained silent for several moments. Then he turned toward one of the maintenance technicians assigned to the training center. Bring me a spotting scope. The request surprised several instructors. Within minutes, a technician returned carrying a high-powered field scope mounted on a tripod. Hayes positioned it carefully and aimed it toward the anchor assembly. The field grew quiet. Recruits who had been eager to begin training now stood motionless, watching. Emily could hear her own heartbeat. Part of her feared she was about to be proven wrong in front of everyone. Hayes leaned into the scope and adjusted the focus. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Nobody spoke. Even Tyler Brooks appeared uncertain now. Finally, Hayes straightened slightly. His expression had changed. It was subtle, but Emily noticed it immediately. The calm neutrality was gone. In its place was concentration. Hayes looked back through the scope. He adjusted the focus again. Then he stepped away and motioned for the technician. Take a look. The technician leaned forward. After only a few seconds, his posture stiffened. He glanced toward Hayes. Sir, Hayes nodded once. That is what I see as well. Staff Sergeant Reed frowned. Chief. Hayes turned toward him. Suspend the exercise. Complete silence followed. Reed blinked. Suspend it. Immediately. No one moved for a moment. The order seemed impossible. This training event had been planned for weeks. Reed looked toward the tower, then back at Hayes. Sir, what exactly are we looking at? Hayes pointed toward the upper assembly. A bracket that is not seated properly against the support plate. The maintenance technician nodded. There appears to be a separation gap, sir. A ripple of confusion spread through the recruits. Nobody had expected this. Hayes continued watching the structure through the scope. I want the inspection crew up there now. Within minutes, 2 technicians equipped with safety gear began making their way toward the upper platform. Every recruit watched. Nobody spoke. Emily stood quietly at the edge of the formation. She felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only uncertainty. She still did not know what the inspection would reveal. She only knew that for the first time all morning, people were finally looking at what she had seen. As the technicians reached the upper section of the tower and began examining the bracket closely, Chief Hayes folded his arms and kept his eyes fixed on the structure. The entire field seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for an answer. Minutes felt like hours as the technicians worked high above the training field. From the ground, The recruits could see them examining the anchor assembly from multiple angles. One technician removed a protective cover while the other carefully inspected the hardware beneath it. Nobody spoke. The usual sounds of training had disappeared. No commands. No jokes. No laughter. Even the breeze seemed quieter. Emily Carter stood near the back of the formation with her hands clasped behind her back. She tried not to focus on the technicians, but it was impossible. Every pair of eyes on the field remained fixed on the tower. Chief Instructor Robert Hayes had not moved. His expression remained calm, but everyone could tell he was waiting for something specific. Staff Sergeant Nolan Reed stood nearby, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The inspection had already lasted far longer than anyone expected. Finally, one of the technicians leaned over the platform railing and called down, "Chief, we need you to see this." Hayes immediately walked toward the access ladder leading to the observation platform built halfway up the structure. The maintenance supervisor followed him. Together, they climbed to a position where they could inspect the assembly more closely. The recruits watched in complete silence. Emily felt her pulse quicken. She had spent the entire morning questioning herself. Now she was about to learn whether her instincts had been correct or completely misguided. Several minutes passed before Hayes reappeared. This time his expression left no room for doubt. He descended the ladder, stopped beside Staff Sergeant Reed, and quietly exchanged a few words that nobody else could hear. Reed's face changed immediately. The confidence he had carried all morning disappeared. "Attention," Hayes called. Every recruit straightened instantly. The field became perfectly silent. Hayes looked across the formation before speaking. "Training is suspended until further notice." Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. Hayes continued. The inspection team discovered a hidden defect within the upper anchor assembly. A ripple of surprise passed through the recruits. The issue was concealed beneath a protective cover and was not visible during the standard ground inspection. Several recruits exchanged stunned looks. Tyler Brooks stared at the tower as if seeing it for the first time. Hayes folded his hands behind his back. The defect was small. It was difficult to detect. However, it was significant enough to require immediate repair before the structure can be used again. Complete silence followed. The words seemed to hang in the air. Emily lowered her eyes briefly. She felt relief more than anything else. Relief that the problem had been found. Relief that training had been stopped. Relief that she had not imagined what she saw. Hayes turned toward the maintenance supervisor. "How many people missed it?" The supervisor answered honestly. "Every inspection team this morning, sir." Several recruits looked shocked. These were experienced professionals. People trusted to evaluate equipment every day. Yet all of them had overlooked the same issue. Hayes nodded once. Then he turned toward the formation again. One person noticed something unusual. No names were mentioned, but everyone already knew who he meant. The entire field slowly turned toward Emily Carter. For the first time that day, there was no laughter in their eyes, only disbelief. The recruit they had mocked all morning had seen what dozens of others had missed. And suddenly the silence felt very different. The silence lingered long after Chief Instructor Robert Hayes finished speaking. For a moment, nobody seemed to know what to do next. The training field that had been filled with laughter only an hour earlier now felt completely different. Recruits stood quietly in formation, staring either at the tower or at Emily Carter. Some looked surprised. Others looked embarrassed. A few simply appeared thoughtful. Emily remained where she was, wishing the attention would disappear. She had never wanted recognition. She had never wanted to prove anyone wrong. She had only wanted someone to take a closer look. Hayes slowly walked to the center of the formation. His eyes moved across the recruits one by one. Years of experience had taught him that moments like this mattered more than any obstacle course or physical test. Skills could be taught. Endurance could be developed. Character was something else entirely. "Listen carefully," he said. Every recruit straightened. "Many people think attention is about seeing what everyone else sees." He paused. "It is not." The field remained silent. The best operators notice what others ignore. They question what others assume. They stay alert even when everyone around them is comfortable. Several recruits lowered their eyes. Hayes did not raise his voice. He did not need to. This morning, experienced personnel missed a problem. Inspection teams missed a problem. Instructors missed a problem. He looked toward Emily. One recruit did not. Nobody laughed this time. Tyler Brooks stared at the ground. The confidence he had displayed all morning was gone. Hayes folded his arms behind his back. The lesson today is not about a bracket. It is not about a tower. It is about discipline. His gaze moved across the formation. When someone raises a concern, you do not mock them. You evaluate the information. You verify the facts. You remain professional. The words landed heavily. For the first time all day, many recruits seemed to understand exactly what had happened. Training was officially canceled while repairs were scheduled. Groups slowly began dispersing across the field. Conversations resumed, but the tone had changed completely. Emily started gathering her equipment, hoping to leave quietly. Before she could, someone approached her. She looked up and saw Tyler Brooks standing there. For several seconds, neither spoke. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "I owe you an apology." Emily blinked. She had not expected that. Tyler glanced toward the tower. "I thought you were making a big deal out of nothing." Emily nodded slightly. "I know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You were right." Emily looked at him for a moment before giving a small smile. "I was not trying to be right." Tyler laughed softly. "That is probably why you were." A few feet away, Jake Wilson offered a respectful nod. Megan Foster smiled. The reactions were small, quiet, genuine. Chief Hayes watched the exchange from a distance before turning to leave. As he walked toward the administration building, he glanced back one final time. Emily was already helping another recruit organize equipment as if nothing unusual had happened. Hayes smiled faintly. Some people demanded respect. Others earned it without ever asking. And on a cool morning at Blackwater, an overlooked recruit had reminded everyone of the difference.